The Wind is My Mother, Bare Heart, Molly Larkin, Chapter 16. We all have something to offer. Final chapter. I remember one of my elders telling me, Shibon, everything has a purpose. See that butterfly? Pretty soon it will fly off, but it's not flying just because it has wings. It has a destination. That grasshopper over there will sit for a while and then it's going to hop away. There's a reason for that. Everything has a purpose and a reason. Always remember that as you go through life. Go with a purpose in mind. Don't just wander around like a tumbleweed. We have many tumbleweeds in New Mexico, going where the wind blows. Sometimes keeping your purpose means walking against the wind to reach your destination. In the movie Dances with Wolves, a young man from the east volunteers to go to the west because he wants to see the western frontier and have new experiences. Searching, he finds a mate, but most important of all, he finds himself. The final key to the whole story is at the end. No longer the person he was, now he is Dances with Wolves, fully accepted by the Lakota tribe and himself. Finding yourself, looking within, is the most important thing in life. This is where I stand. This is who I am. When you know that, you can tackle any circumstance that comes along. You're glad that you are you, regardless of what other people might say. Maybe your own parents discouraged you from your childhood dreams and aspirations, or some friends said, I don't think you ought to do this. What do they know? They're not living your life. It's you who has to live with yourself. What you find good within yourself, that's what's most important. If you are in harmony with yourself, with your mind, with your body, and your soul, then what else is there? There's nothing that cannot be overcome. Someone once said to me, I wish I had the same amount of spirit that you have. I turned to him and said, we were all given the same amount of spirit, none more, none less. The difference between individuals is allowing the spirit to have more of you. So that's where the difference is, yielding to that spirit more. Although you seemingly have yielded, you may still be holding back in many ways. Whether it's through a vision quest or through introspection and contemplation, opening yourself to receive direction from a higher intelligence is known as the inner quest, searching within, trying to bring out the real you, including your emotions and beliefs. There's a path for each of us to follow. That's what life is all about. Many people say to me, I'd like to learn your ways. That's okay with me, but I would rather have people learn their own way, and equally important is how they use what they learn. Quest for wisdom. Questing is something all people have done from childhood. You have quested for knowledge ever since preschool and kindergarten, up on through the university. Traditionally, the Creek people's primary focus wasn't on how smart we became. Our focus was on wisdom, how we used what little we had. I've always enjoyed the story about the man whose tire fell off his car right in front of the mental institution. Apparently, someone didn't tighten the lugs properly after fixing his tire, so it came off, and that car fell onto the axle. He had a heck of a time raising the car with his jack to the proper level, but he finally did, retrieved the tire, and put it on. But all the lugs were missing, and he didn't know how to secure it. An inmate was watching all this from behind the fence and shouted out, Hey, mister, you want me to tell you how to keep that tire on till you can get to a service station? This man was already hot, bothered, tired, and disgusted. You? Yes, me. All right, tell me. Take one lug from each of the other wheels. Put them on that tire, and it will stay on until you get to where you're going. I may be crazy, but I'm not stupid. You can be a double PhD in any given course, but if you don't have wisdom to go along with that knowledge, then you can get into trouble. I sometimes speak to the inmates of various penal institutions, and there are many PhDs there. They had knowledge, but they didn't have the wisdom to use that knowledge in the right way. We learn many things as we grow up, but how do we use them? That's where the wisdom comes in. Wisdom to guide that knowledge. My grandson Bobby was 6'2" and weighed 180 pounds at 13 years old. One day he was standing in line to pay for lunch at school, and his friend standing next to him took out his money. Playfully, Bobby took the money just to tease him. Then someone behind him took the money from him. It went on down the lunch line, and by the time it got back to his friend, part of that money was missing. The principal got involved and called Bobby's mother at work because Bobby wouldn't tell who actually got the money. He really wasn't sure who had it. His mother grounded him. No more Nintendo, no more bringing home friends, no overnights with friends until we resolve this with the school. My grandson wants to follow in my footsteps for whatever reasons. I haven't told him he ought to do this. He wants to do it, to learn some of my ways. And I've had long talks with him about dealing with various situations. He was grounded and deprived of certain privileges, but he didn't say anything. He wanted to be true to his friend, but he didn't want to snitch on the others either, so he was caught in the middle. The next day he went to school and came back as if nothing happened. His mother said, "Well, how did it go?" "Okay." "What do you mean, okay?" "Two boys admitted to the principal they took the money." "How is it that they admitted they're the ones who took it?" He just nonchalantly said, "I told them to." That's all it took for him to settle the situation. At 13 years old, he was beginning to use a little wisdom. So wisdom is something to look for, a quest. The beginning of wisdom for each one of us is to understand ourselves a little better. Strive to find your true identity, your role in life, your potential, and your limitations. Once you are aware of these things, then you have something to work with in order to grow. Going beyond the walls. There was a man in the Bible by the name of Jacob, and one of the greatest wrestling matches ever recorded was when he wrestled an angel because he wanted a blessing. He got his hip thrown out of joint, but he wouldn't give up. He kept wrestling until he got the blessing. Jacob received his blessing because of his perseverance, his unwillingness to give up, in spite of physical injury to himself. By that same token, whatever we want in life is possible for us to achieve, although the attainment of it may not be easy. If it's a worthwhile goal, it keeps us going forward. Too often, we define success in terms of financial achievement. I view success as doing your very best at all costs. Abraham Lincoln suffered many defeats in politics before he even became president of the United States. He was laughed at because he was ugly. Someone once told him he looked like an ape, but when Lincoln got to be president, he appointed that person to his cabinet because he was the most qualified. Lincoln had the ability to overlook those little slurs and slights, accepting them. We hear of blind poets and deaf composers. It's hard to imagine, yet they still wrote and composed because they had something within them that said they could do it. It shows us that if you want something badly enough and strive for it, you can do it. It may not come overnight, but your persistence will win out. We view much of life around us from our own little safety perch. We look and say, "How I wish I could be that. How I wish I could do that." Regardless of what field you go into, there's going to be someone who's a little bit better at it. But what of it? If someone can do better, wonderful for them. But there are some things you are better at than them. Always remember that. Don't focus on the other person who can do one thing better than you. Maybe you can do two things better than the other person can. It balances out. You have it within you to become good at anything you strive for. The thing is, never give up. Accept what you are and be proud of it. Be grateful for it, but never let it go to your head. Always keep your feet on the ground. We strive to meet goals, but in our plans, we should see beyond the goal. Once we have achieved that goal, what are we going to do with it? The goal was merely a starting point. Once achieved, a new plan comes into play and we begin to expand from that point into other fields. When I was living in Oklahoma, I visited many different penal institutions and spoke to the Indian inmates. I know that many Indians are very talented, so on one of my visits to a group at Stringtown, I told them, I'm not here trying to make you think that I'm better than any of you. We are all alike. We are all one, not only in color and race, but in our heritage. And I'm not here to judge and say someone has done wrong or point my finger saying you're guilty of this and you're guilty of that. I'm here to recognize each one of you as an individual human being. Even though your freedom is limited, there are some things that no bars or doors or fences can ever contain, and that's freedom of thought. You can have aspirations, dreams, and visions. There are many things that you can still do, even in a limited space. Many of you are poets. Many of you are artists. Why don't you put your talents together? Contact a group of businessmen and find an outlet for your work. Those are just some of the ways in which your mind can go beyond these walls. After I spoke to them, they gathered some art supplies and went to work. Some were very good artists, and they got the Chamber of Commerce of a nearby town to sell their art, and they collected money over several months. At the end of the school year, they chose one Indian preschool, and they paid for those Indian children and their parents to go to Disneyland in California. So they found freedom in a limited space and did something about it. Just because you fall off a horse, you don't have to lie there. If all you can do is crawl, then crawl. If you can get up, walk. If you have to limp, find something to lean on and keep going. Never say, this is it, and give up. Think about the thrill those children received on their rides at Disneyland, seeing some of the characters they'd read about. How do you put a price tag on the joy that little child receives, and what did it do for the inmates? Suppose you see two people working and ask, what are you doing? One would probably say, I'm making $12.50 an hour. And you turn to the other one, what are you doing? I'm building a church. He had the same job with the same amount of pay, but the motivation, the feeling is different. When you know you're working to help others, then it becomes something very significant. That project was healing for the inmates. Instead of putting them through a counseling program, all they needed was a little encouragement. You have it within you to do something constructive, and they did. It made me proud of them. Each one of us has something to offer in this life. Every one of us. I don't care about your background, what your academic standing is. You may have a double PhD, or maybe you never got more than a D in school. You have something to give. All of us have something to contribute. When the railroads were active, way back before Amtrak, we had the Chieftain, the New York Central, and the Baltimore and Ohio. I used to ride all of them. There was a railroad employee who had a shift requiring him to be away from home for days at a time. His family lived in a company house along the railroad track. The front yard had no lawn, just dirt, and the back of the house was a field. He had 3 children, a boy and a girl, and a 4-year-old who was slightly retarded and could not walk. He had to crawl wherever he went. On the days that the father was to be coming home, the children used to look down at the railroad track and watch for him. Daddy will be coming home soon. And sure enough, he would be walking home, carrying his coat and his lunch bucket. That was the cue for the two older children to go out back to pick wild flowers and make little bouquets. As their father came closer, they would run to meet him. "Dad, I made this bouquet for you." He would take both in his arms, kiss them, and carry them back home. It was a beautiful sight. What about the little one? He couldn't run out and pick beautiful flowers. He couldn't walk. So as far as he could reach in that dirt yard, he'd pick up a little rock. No particular rock, just an ordinary rock, and a little stick over here. He'd have a few little rocks and sticks in his hand, and when Dad came into the yard, he called out, "Dada, Dada." He wanted to make a presentation too. So that's why I say it doesn't matter what station in life you happen to represent. You have something to offer, and the opportunity to offer it is today, not 10 years from now. We are here to reflect the beauty of all life. The beauty of the trees, the grass, the animals, the birds, the rivers as they flow by. All these may be lost in time. While we are still here, can we not appreciate and love the land, the environment, so that when we pass on, we will have left something solid and beautiful for those who are going to follow after us? Are those of us here now building a solid foundation on which our young people can grow strong and productive in a positive way? Perhaps one of the greatest ways we can teach is to live by example, showing our young ones what we want them to learn. Our actions speak for themselves. Instead of pointing a finger and saying, "I don't know what's become of these youngsters," we should look at ourselves. When we die, the grandchildren we leave behind may grow up and become sickly because of the pollution that we caused. When their friends are shot down for no reason at all, they'll ask, why couldn't they stop the gangs, the drive-by shootings? There was a time when the Indian people have never heard of suicide. It was a rare occurrence. Then they left the reservation, and their traditions went into urban areas, and the children got exposed to cutting class in school, partying, and smoking pot. Maybe in the competitive world, both parents are working, and there's a lot of unsupervised time for the kids. Young people get hooked on drugs. They can't afford to buy over and over unless they have a decent job, and they can't hold a decent job if they're doing all this stuff. It gets too big to cope with. So we had a lot of young Indian people committing suicide because they lost touch with their roots and their purpose. Bring it down to 1994 in Albuquerque. A 16-year-old and two other teenagers killed his grandparents because the grandparents didn't want them drinking beer in their home. I'm talking about values in life. Where do we get them? Go back to the basics. In our ceremonies, we try to find out what it takes to put meaning into life. How can we apply ourselves in a constructive manner? This is what needs to be presented to school children today. Our elders taught that when you shoot an arrow, you first have to pull it back before it can go forward. This was the basis of our greatest teaching, self-knowledge. Before you can progress, know who you are. Know those things that you don't like about yourself, then know your potential. From there, you can go forward. Our children were first taught to shoot an arrow as far as they could. Then, after they had learned that, they were taught direction and how to hit a target. So after you have learned something about yourself, self-discipline is the next step. We have many ways of learning to live in harmony with our environment, but first, we must learn to live in harmony with ourselves. If we can't master ourselves, how can we master anything else? Questing to know ourselves teaches us how to live before we spend too much time learning to make a living. If we leave out that how to live, we may be able to make a living, but what if the stock market drops suddenly or our source of income is cut off? If we don't know how to live, we may hit bottom when those external things we rely on are gone. But if we learn how to live, in spite of setbacks, we will continue on. We can find avenues to sustain us, and life will be meaningful for us. This is why I'd like for young people today to learn about some of our traditions, because they are tools to live by, ways that bring meaning into life. The giveaway. Most people have heard the expression Indian giver as meaning giving something and then taking it right back. That was a misinterpretation that got started a long time ago. As poor as we are, Native American people are known for their generosity. I said earlier that it is hard for us to say thank you with nothing in our hand. Giving is integral to our way of life. The true tradition of the giveaway is to show appreciation by giving out a few gifts. At a gathering, such as a powwow, someone may call your name and give you a gift, perhaps a blanket or even money. You may have been in great need at that time and you never forgot. So 3 or 4 years later, at another big gathering, you call that person up. It's your turn now. You tell him, so many years ago you filled my heart with joy. I've never forgotten it. To show that I've been thinking about you, I got this especially for you, and I want you to have it. And you give that person a gift. It's our way of saying thank you. True Indian giving is when someone gives you something and later on you give that person something in return. They're getting something back, but not the same object. The giveaway tradition started out in some of our funeral services. When we were putting away our loved ones, there would be a great feast, and the family was glad that so many people had come to honor their loved one, so they could be put away with dignity. They'd call someone up and maybe give that person a blanket or a shawl. What they were doing was this: when you make someone happy, he will take some of that hurt that you are feeling, take it far enough away to where the winds will catch it. It makes your own hurt a little easier, a little lighter. You give away from your heart, and you give away on behalf of your loved one. That's how most of our giveaways got started. Then the practice was extended into the form of appreciation. So that is the tradition of our giveaway. I called you brother. In our Indian tradition, we also have adoptions. I have many adopted relatives from many tribes. One is Raymond Butler of the Otoe tribe in Oklahoma. He's my brother by adoption. A few months after my son's death, Raymond held a big feast for me and my family. After we got through eating, he stood up and said, "Brother, you helped me to put my mother away when she passed on, and you said some beautiful words that I will never forget. I call you brother at that time when we've become real close. You haven't helped only my family. Our entire tribe hears about how you help other people. When they're crying, you go over there and always seem to look after them. Now it has come to the point where you yourself shed tears over your great loss. There's nothing we can do for you. I wish we could, but my wife and I call you here because we want to share our oldest son with you so that you can have someone you can call son, and he can call you dad." Then he put a blanket around me and put some money in my hands. That's our way of adoptions. So it became that way. From that time on, Bobby Butler was like a real son to me. Every Father's Day I'd get a card from him, maybe something in the way of a package. It was a beautiful relationship, just like with a birth son. I'd come and bless his children, and he'd take care of the drum when I ran TV meetings. He was a very good drummer. He knew my songs, and when I handled so many meetings that my throat was getting a little husky, he'd carry on and sing those songs for me. Bubby was the head of the HUD program for the tribe. He had to evict 2 families after many notices because the supervisor said, "You have to do this." In retaliation, the families had been harassing him all summer long. On one particular night, he was sponsoring a teepee meeting from his own son's 15th birthday. Everything was going real fine. Bubby was taking care of the drum, and he had a Cheyenne brother conducting the meeting for him. Round about midnight, young boys from those families came around the meeting harassing people and throwing beer cans at the teepee. They started cutting that brand new teepee with a knife. It was a meeting for his son, his place, so Bubby felt the responsibility and ran out to see about it. That's what the boys wanted. They ganged up on him, and one stabbed him in the back. When he fell to the ground, they stomped on his face and killed him. Those who were in the teepee came out and found his body on the ground. When they picked him up, he still had that drumstick in his hand, a badge of his faith in a living God and a loyalty even unto death. My grandson has a hard time whenever his birthday comes around because he thinks of his dad who went on. There are many, many people I have attended from all walks of life. Many people who've been hurt in some way or other, and I try to make things right. But the greatest challenge that was ever presented to me as a medicine person, as well as a human being, was when I heard about my adopted son's murder. How does one deal with something like that? I had the power to do something very bad to each one of those boys, even at a distance. But by so doing, I would be no better than the ones who took the life of my son. I have a sacred pipe that does not allow me to use it for revenge. I must fill it and let him take care of things like that. I really had to pray about it. I told the great being I cannot condone what they did, but those boys are still your creation. And if I talk about love, I have to love all mankind from all walks of life. And you see my situation. Because I love my son and I'm taking this personally, I want to love those people in your way, but I can't. So I'm asking that you continue to love them through me so I will understand how your love works. Not something we just talk about, but something that we can experience and live. I went from New Mexico to Oklahoma and handled the whole burial ceremony. Among the Otoe tribe, the dead are buried on the 4th day. Until then, speeches are made every night, and I had to give the main speech to a whole group of people in a gymnasium where the casket lay. After all the people had crowded in, it was my turn to speak about the son that he was to me. I told the people within the life of my son there was a soul. There is no knife long enough to have touched that soul. It's still intact. His body was destroyed, but it was merely a housing for the soul that lives on. For that part, I'm confident that he's all right. When you take something away in simple arithmetic, we call it subtraction. A minus sign that's represented by a horizontal bar. Taking away. That's what those boys tried to do. Take away his life. My son was taking care of the sacred drum. When they picked his body up, he still had that drumstick in his hand. Faithful and loyal, even unto death, that drumstick indicated his own belief in a higher being. From his heart to the heart of the Creator, that makes a vertical, and it makes a plus out of that minus sign. If you have a negative, if you have a minus sign in your life, think of the story I just related. If a young Indian from the Otoe Reservation at Red Rock, Oklahoma, could die for his belief, could die for his faith, could die for the hope of good things for his own son and family, What you and I can do now is live for something. Live for our belief. Live our faith. Live for the hope of good things to come, not only here and now, but in generations to follow. The word memorial does not indicate that someone has died. It symbolizes that someone has lived. What is going to be that living memorial that you're going to leave behind? That I'm going to leave behind? Why are we here now? We're here to add something, to construct, to preserve, to leave something good for those little ones who are going to come into our world. Let that motivation be so firmly established in your heart and mind that you can say, I will stand for this. I will live for this. The end.